Welcome to this week's Harmonic Pulse, where we explore the subtle patterns shaping both our inner and our collective experience. I'm Victoria, and I help you rewrite the story that you were told about who you are so you can create a life aligned with your soul's true calling. Have you ever caught yourself mid-sentence and suddenly recognized a tone that didn't feel entirely yours? Perhaps words that you recognized as your mother's, or perhaps you watched someone you love and seen something shift in them, a behavior, a way of relating, maybe a sharpness. And you thought, well, I've seen this before, not just in them, but somewhere further back in the family. I've been watching this happen recently in people that I know well. And I've noticed that it tends to occur at particular ages or life stages, almost as if a timer goes off. Someone who seemed pretty relaxed suddenly isn't. An issue that felt complete resurfaces. A behaviour appears that no one saw coming. And unless you know what you're looking at, it can feel like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. What if some of what we carry began long before we arrived? And what if the reason it's appearing now is simply that the conditions finally came right for it to surface? Many of us begin to notice at some point that certain things repeat. Ways of relating, ways of responding to intimacy or success, ways of holding power. Sometimes they show up in us, and sometimes in the people around us. And often they're being carried without anyone realizing it, because these patterns were never truly seen. They were inherited and quietly passed forward. Sometimes these patterns show up as control, a comment that lands with a sting, a question that touches something that they know is sensitive, a warmth that withdraws at precisely the moment you begin to feel confident. And this is the part I want to stay with for a moment, because these patterns don't tend to arrive randomly. They surface at particular thresholds: midlife, when children are born, when children leave home, when someone begins to come into their own power, when someone close to us starts to become successful or receive recognition. It's as if something dormant wakes up. And what makes this so disorientating is that if you haven't done your inner work, if you haven't begun to look at what you've inherited and consciously untangle it, this activation appears to come from nowhere. That sudden change in someone, or a sudden problem in a relationship, or a sudden version of yourself that you don't recognize. But it isn't sudden at all. It was always there, waiting for the right conditions. So why does this happen? What we're beginning to understand is that when we experience something overwhelming, emotionally, relationally, or in our environment, and we don't have the resources to fully move through it, something hardens. The body stores what the mind couldn't process. The emotional charge becomes held in the nervous system, shaping how we perceive the world and how we respond to it. And what research is beginning to suggest is that these stored adaptations can influence how our genes are expressed. The hardening doesn't just live in one person, it can move through the family line, through the generations that follow. And yet, what we're also beginning to understand is that it doesn't have to continue. And this is where something fascinating comes in. The cellular biologist, Dr. Bruce Lipton, he spent decades exploring what he came to call epigenetics. Epi meaning above, control above the genes. The idea that our biology is not fixed, but responsive, shaped by environment, by perception, and by belief. What his work points to is that we are not simply running on inherited code that cannot be changed, but that the conditions around us and within us influence which aspects of that code become expressed, which patterns come online, and which remain dormant. And so, if a pattern can be switched on by conditions, it can also be switched off. What became active through environment or experience can be met, recognized, and rewritten through conscious awareness, through doing the inner work before the timer goes off. So, what does this mean in practice? It means that awareness is not just a nice concept, it's a mechanism to see a pattern clearly before it activates. When we can name it, trace it, and understand where it came from, we are creating new conditions. Conditions in which the old code no longer has to run. Now, this is the work of making the unconscious conscious, of returning to wholeness. And if this is the work that you feel called to, then this is precisely what I support people with, gently and at the right depth for where you are. Because when the conditions arrive, there is then nothing left to activate. And when we begin to see these dynamics for what they are, we release the need to take it personally, because we see the pattern, not just the person. And from there, we have real choice. We can repeat the pattern or respond differently. You can carry it forward or let it end with you. But that choice only becomes available when we've done enough inner work to recognize what we're actually looking at. Otherwise, it simply looks like life happening to us, and the pattern continues down the generation. I want to come back now to what I said at the beginning. I've been watching this in people I know, and when I look more closely, I can see exactly where it came from. I can see the pattern. I can see the generation it moved through, and I can see the moment it found its conditions. And I can see it clearly because I've done the work to step out of my own version of it. And that's what individuation gives you, the ability to recognize what is surfacing, to name it with compassion, and to choose not to pass it on. So this week's resonance note, I invite you to simply observe, notice the patterns moving through you and through the people around you. And if something feels like it just came out of nowhere, stay with that and ask yourself, what life stage is this person in right now? What might have just become activated? And what is this asking me to look at in myself? Not everything we carry began with us, and not everything that surfaces is a crisis. Sometimes it's simply a pattern finally meeting the light. And what can be switched on can also be switched off. And awareness is how we begin. If this is resonating, and if you feel the edges of a pattern in your own life that you haven't fully named yet, the work I share around sovereignty and conscious creation was built for exactly this moment. When something activates and you want to meet it with awareness and rewrite what comes next, then you're warmly welcome to explore it with me. Until next week's Pulse, Have a good week.